Is BYU beatable? The Cougars are ranked inside the top 10, but they do have a couple of weaknesses on both sides of the ball that Utah will have a chance to exploit and maybe even use to their advantage to claim victory over the Cougars. We're breaking down Utah versus BYU on today's Locked On Utes.
You are Locked On Utes, your daily podcast on the Utah Utes. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for making Locked On Utes your first listen and view of the day. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, available wherever you get your podcasts, as well as on YouTube. If this is your first time listening to our show, make sure you like and subscribe. Love interacting with all of you in the YouTube comments, as well as on social media, where you can follow our show at Locked On Utes on X. Today's episode of Locked On Utes is brought to you by Game Time. You can download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege. That's all caps, no spaces, for $20 off your first purchase. My name is JT Wistrcill, former intern inside the University of Utah Athletic Department. Excited to be joined by Utah beat reporter Michelle Bodkin on this one. And Michelle, when you were talking about this rivalry between Utah and BYU, these two teams are in drastically different places than we thought they'd be coming into it. I mean, BYU's win total was literally 4.5, and now it's Utah who's at the 4-4 mark, the 500 mark, and the Cougars are the ones who are ranked inside the top 10. So yes, BYU's coming in; they're going to be the favorite, but this has not been a dominant football team. They nearly lost to Oklahoma State. The UCF game was close for a while. UCF was even favored going into it. Give the Cougars credit. They've continued to find ways to win. But as we're going to break down in a moment, on the offensive and defensive side of the ball, there are weak points for the Cougars, or at least points that are not dominant, I would say. And thus why I absolutely think Utah has a chance to win this game, just outside of the fact that it is a rivalry and anything can happen, especially in Rice-Eccles Stadium.
Yeah, it's been an interesting year for sure. It feels like a little Freaky Friday kind of thing has happened here with Utah and BYU, where they've switched bodies and you have Jamie Lee Curtis and Lindsay Lohan kind of running around trying to figure out what's going on here, because their realities are not what they're used to. But Big 12's been interesting because I feel like you sit and you watch it, and there's just not really anyone that jumps out on paper to you.
Even the undefeated Cougars?
Even the undefeated Cougars. And look here, I give them 1,000% credit. You've made the most of a situation. You've taken the best advantage out of any other team in this league to put yourself in a great position. And no one can take that away from, I guess there's still like 4 more teams that could potentially take that away from you. But like at the end of the day is you've made the most of, the opportunities presented to you to this point. And, but to your point, there's some things that I sit there and I watch and I go, and it was the same with Iowa State. And obviously, we saw, goodness, now I'm trying to remember who they played last weekend.
Texas Tech beat Iowa State.
Yeah. Texas Tech, figured it out. So does anyone in this league figure it out with BYU? Is that something that waits until later on in, say, postseason? Maybe no one figures it out. But I don't think they're unbeatable. It's just that no one has beaten them yet.
Yeah, they haven't. And like we said, BYU has done a great job of winning games. The Cougars deserve to be ranked in the top 10. I actually would even have them higher. I think they have an argument to be ranked over Penn State so far, because it's kind of the same thing you could say about, like, at least BYU has the SMU win versus Penn State doesn't have a great win yet. And I'm glad the Cougars were at least in the top 10. They deserve to be there. But when you're looking at this game and just breaking it down from a standpoint, there is the FanDuel spread in this game is 3.5 BYU. Top 10 team versus team that's lost 4 games in a row. That seems a little closer than it should be. But that's because when you look at the context of these two teams, it makes sense how you land at that spread not being as drastic, on top of the fact that it is at home for Utah, even if Utah's home field advantage has not been as good this year as we were kind of hoping for. Not in part, I'm not blaming fans for that. I'm just saying the fact that this team is not as good as they normally are at home. One thing to talk about is, like, for BYU, like, they've been really good, but for example, their rush defense is 68th, right? So they are one of the tempest teams, but their run defense isn't even close to that. They have allowed over 180 yards in back-to-back games to quality backs. RJ Harvey, Ollie Gordon, two quality backs. Gordon actually had his best game of the year against BYU. You know who else is a quality back? Makai Bernard, top 30 in the nation in rushing yards per game, and he's averaging 6 yards per carry as of late for this Utah team. I think Makai is going to continue to put this Utah team in position where it's third and manageable. That's the thing about Utah that's been so frustrating. Utah actually hasn't been in a ton of third and longs. Don't get me wrong. They've definitely been in some, but there have been a number of 3rd and 3 or anywhere from like 3rd and 5 to 3rd and 2. It's like just get a couple yards in the throw game, and they haven't been able to do that. So the ground game is one area I look at and say, okay, I think Utah can have success running the ball against BYU. I do not want Utah to air it out a lot against the Cougars. They have 14 interceptions on the season, and as a team in total, Utah has thrown 12 so far, so I don't like that matchup there. But speaking of the passing game, Utah is the 13th ranked pass defense in the country. Jake Retzloff has been really good, but he's also thrown 7 picks, and he's had a good year. He hasn't thrown for over 250 yards against a power 4 team on the season. So if Utah can get a lead early, just get a couple of touchdown drives in this game. We'll talk about it more in the second segment because I want to talk about what the offense needs to do, but just a couple touchdown drives, make BYU play from behind. There's a chance that Retzloff's going to turn it over, and that could allow Utah to have some success here because, as I mentioned, there are a couple of numbers here where even though the Cougars are one of the 10 best teams in the country, there are several statistics that they do not rank top 10 in.
Yeah, and I think it's funny that no one's taken full advantage of that, and we'll see if Utah can figure it out. But a few things that Utah has done this year that to me is head scratching when they've been presented with similar-ish opportunities, they've gone away from the run game. Mm-hmm. You have Makai Bernard doing well. You're going against defenses that, for the most part, are not great run defenses. And obviously that's kind of the weakness for BYU defensively as well. But for whatever reason, they don't stick with it. And that's been a little bit baffling. The amount that they've chosen to throw, again, with an inexperienced freshman. This is, of course, assuming they're sticking with Isaac Wilson. It's kind of sounding like it might be Brandon Rose this week, but I mean, that's a guy that also hasn't played a whole lot. Do you really want him throwing 30 times in this game when you have a reliable guy like Makai Bernard that you can kind of lean on? And especially, again, where that seems to be the weakness in this defense, why not take advantage of that? So it'll be interesting to see if they finally get it together and start leaning into things that could be strengths or advantages for them, rather than trying to essentially fit a round peg in a square hole, and try and make something work that's just not working, aka airing it out with guys that, I mean, you can and should some, obviously, right? You've got to keep defenses. You have to keep defenses honest. You can't let them creep up in the box, but you're doing it so much that you've opened things up to untimely mistakes, which is something that BYU has been very good at taking advantage of. And then on the flip side, as you mentioned, Retzloff has a bit of a propensity when he gets, I think, rushed to get flustered and make some of those mistakes as well. As you mentioned, he's also not like a huge thrower. He doesn't rack up a whole lot of yardage, but he's super efficient in the times that he has to be. And I think that's been the difference maker there is, I mean, Utah's put up quite a few yards offensively, but they haven't been efficient with it, especially in the red zone when it's time to put points on the board. So to me, that's just the big difference there. And again, it'll be interesting to see how this all rolls out. You look at Utah defensively, unlike the Cougars, they haven't been the best, again, at kind of taking advantage of opportunities. There's been a lot of almost for this crew as far as interceptions and sacks, but almost aren't it. Like they don't count on the stat sheet. So it's going to be kind of a situation of Utah needs a little bit of what BYU has had this year, essentially.
They do. And this is going to be a massive game for both sides to see who can finish the year stronger. BYU and Utah have drastically different goals. BYU's thinking college football playoff. Utah's just trying to get bowl eligible and build some momentum going into next year. But it's going to be fun to see how these teams perform in Rice-Eccles Stadium. And like you said, the offense has just got to do something in this game for Utah. So the question is, can they? That's what we're going to be talking about in one moment. But first, today's episode of Locked On Utes is brought to you by our friends at Hims. Guys, sometimes intimate moments happen spontaneously, and we always want to be ready so we can perform in the bedroom. Hims provide access to treatments that can help you stay hard and last longer, giving you the boost of confidence so you can be ready whenever the mood strikes. Hims is changing men's healthcare by providing you with access to affordable sexual health treatments from the comfort of your couch. Hims provides access to a range of doctor-trusted ED treatments like chewable hard mints and Viagra and Cialis, and the genetics for up to 95% cheaper. No insurance is needed, and one low price covers everything from the treatments to ongoing care. You can start your free online visit today at hims.com/lockedon. That's all caps, no spaces. That's HIMS.com/lockedon for your personalized ED treatment options. hims.com/lockedon to try Hims today. Today's episode of Locked On Utes is also brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. Get ready to take the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers can bet $5, get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place the live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. And speaking of the NFL, so many great games going on across the association this week. We're halfway through the NFL season, which is wild to think about. And obviously, since we're halfway through the NFL season, we are well on our way to the conclusion of the college football season. Utah has just 4 games remaining. And speaking of one of those games, it's a big rivalry game against BYU. 9th-ranked Cougars and the Utah Utes facing off. Utah is right now BYU is a 3.5-point favorite against Utah. It's an interesting spread, as we kind of discussed, for when you got a team that's ranked in the top 10 and not too much of not a traditional road game in terms of you have to fly to it. You're just gonna be able to bust to it basically. So it's an interesting line in this game. However you're leaning or feeling about it, make sure you head over to FanDuel today. All right, Michelle, coming back in this one, talking about Utah's offense. Can Utah's offense do enough for them to win this game? I believe the answer to that is yes, because I think the truth of it is I don't expect Utah to score 30 in this game. I don't know what I could look at over the past few games and go, okay, I got confidence in this offense to finally whip into shape, and then now they'll be fantastic and firing on all cylinders. That I don't expect that to happen, whether it's Brandon Rose, Isaac Wilson, doesn't matter. There's been too many issues of inconsistencies. But all you're going to need to do, honestly, is put together 3 to 4 scoring drives in this game. And that's where you hope the defense can do enough and hopefully spot you some short fields as well to help out with that. Let's also talk about this BYU offense. They've done some good things. Their rushing attack in particular. And Retzloff's made some big-time throws. We give him credit there. But the only time they played a defense in the top 50 was SMU, who did hold BYU to 18 points. Now, that was earlier in the season, but that SMU, obviously a really good team. It's a top 15 team, but Utah has a top 20 defense. So I do think there's a chance this Utah defense can make life hard on BYU. And that's where, Michelle, I just need the offense to produce a couple of drives, 2 touchdowns, a couple of field goals, and a defensive touchdown would help out a lot too. But I don't think Utah's offense has to score 4 touchdowns in order for them to win, because I do think this defense can get it done.
I mean, it's been an interesting thing, right? Utah's lost by like 7 points a couple of times this season. So it really has been a matter of this defense has uglied things up enough to give them a chance. But as you mentioned, the offense has not kind of upheld its end of the bargain, so to speak. And I know a lot of people have been a little disgruntled about, well, the defense hasn't been making the chaos plays that we're used to. And I think some of that is because the offense hasn't performed per usual. They get sent out a little bit quicker. Those chaos plays take a lot of energy and some of that kind of stuff. So it's just been a whole cyclical kind of mess of things. But to your point, I think there is a way forward for this offense. I think it's been pretty clear and obvious to a lot of us, and it's run the dang ball. Like, run the dang ball. You have Makai Bernard. I thought Jalen Glover showed some really good things the other week, and at the end of the day, he was fairly productive, but only had 4 carries. Like,
Yeah.
It's just like, why do you keep moving away from the thing that I feel like is ultimately working for you in this offense? And then sprinkling, getting the ball to a guy like Dorian Singer or Brant Keithy here and there, again, to keep the defenses honest. But for the love of all, if you want a chance to win this game, if you want to get back on track, you need to rely on what's been working well, and that's been Makai Bernard.
You have to. And you just got to do enough in the throw game, as we mentioned. This is not a game. Wilson does not need to have over 200 yards passing for Utah to win this game, but he has to deliver on a couple of third downs, because there's going to be a time where it's going to be 3rd and short, or maybe even 4th and short, and Utah just ran it and they didn't get it. They got to lean on Makai Bernard and Jalen Glover, like you said, but you cannot be one-dimensional in this game if you're Utah. And that's where, as bad as Utah's pass offense has been, they have 2 of the best players in the conference at their position, Brant Keithy and Dorian Singer. You got to get them the ball. And that's something where, but Jakin did a good job of trying to incorporate, the bubble screens, the hitches, like just those shorter screens to receivers to on the outside, give those guys opportunities. And whether it was Wilson missing a couple of them, which were really killer, he just missed multiple throws in the flat, which were very tough to swallow when you look back on the game, as well as you look at, some of Rose's, Rose had the interception. I don't know if he actually missed a screen, but you just got to simplify things. It does hurt for Utah. They do not have money parks out there, so you are down your best deep threat. Munir McClain's done good things for this team, and I am excited to see what he can do in this matchup. But Dorian Singer and Brant Keithy should catch most of the balls for this Utah squad, simply from a play designing standpoint. There should be a lot of games where those are the only guys even going out. So I expect Utah to continue to rely on a lot of, hey, get the run game going, because what does that all open up? The play action game, which makes life, RPO game, just makes life easier on Isaac. And when you're not doing that, there's no reason to just chuck it deep constantly. You want to get the short passing game involved. And Michelle, I liked a lot of what Bajakian did last game. To me, it came down to more execution. I agree. I think we need to continue to run the ball and stick to that, especially against this BYU team that has gotten gashed on the ground, at least in their last couple of games. But I'm very curious to see if it's Wilson or Rose, if we see any wrinkles to this offense, since they did have a bye week. So you get Bajakian a little bit more time to not change things. You can't do that. He even said himself, the system is the system, but to try and tweak things that best support his style, as well as maximizing the players.
I would agree with you. I felt like from a play calling standpoint, it was probably the smoothest flow I've seen from Utah all season long, that Houston game. But to your point, execution was atrocious, and the storyline of the game, plays that were there to be made were not made. And that's something that this team is going to have to figure out. Again, I think they've been overly quick to move away from the run game. And that's been maybe the one thing that's consistently been working for them throughout this season. But it does sound like, they've worked on some things. I would hope so. Again, you've basically had 2 weeks now to do some things, really study and think about who you want to put out there, kind of specifically talking about the quarterbacks, but just really any of your personnel, and figuring out the plays that work the best to those strengths, which is something that I think Utah has really, really struggled with this year offensively. And I think is a big reason why Andy Ludwig is not there anymore. So we'll see what was rolled out. Again, I'm with you. I liked the plan Bajakian put in place, but they have to execute better. a good plan does you no good if you don't go out and execute it in key moments. And that's been a huge issue for this team as well. So, that's something that hopefully they figured out how to correct and get around, because again, the game plan is only a piece of it. If you don't execute it, you're also not winning.
No, you're not. And Utah's not going to win if they don't execute better. It's plain and simple, especially against, what is simply the best team they've played on the year so far in this BYU team. And this massive test is going to be very interesting to see what Utah yields coming off a bye week. BYU has one, too. And there are going to be a chance for Utah to win this game. This rivalry is always close. Utah has won 9 of the last 10, but of course, BYU got the last one. We've been waiting for it on a couple of years, but it's going to be very, once again, exciting to see how it all results in Rice-Eccles Stadium. We'll keep breaking it down on this week's show, but we also have another sport to break down, and not just one, but two. Utah men's and women's basketball were back in action. Michelle, you were there to take it all in, so want to ask you what you thought about both those programs' season debut in one moment. But first, today's episode of Locked On Utes is brought to you by our friends at ZBiotics. ZBiotics Pre Alcohol Probiotic Drink is the world's first genetically engineered probiotic. It was invented by PhD scientists to tackle rough mornings after drinking. Here's how it works. When you drink alcohol, it gets converted into a toxic byproduct in the gut. It's this byproduct, not dehydration, that's to blame for your rough next day. Pre-alcohol produces an enzyme to break this byproduct down. Just remember to make ZBiotics your first drink of the night. You can drink responsibly and you'll feel better tomorrow. How to use ZBiotics? It's really easy. For the best results, make pre-alcohol your first drink of the night. So before you go out, just make sure you take ZBiotics. Then when you are out, pace yourself, hydrate, and after, just get a good night's rest. Then enjoy the next day. Wake up feeling refreshed and ready to take on the day because you prepped before the big night. Go to ZBiotics.com/LockedOnCollege to learn more and get 15% off your first order when you use Locked On College. That's all caps and no spaces at checkout. ZBiotics is backed with a 100% money guarantee. So if you're unsatisfied for any reason, they'll refund your money, no questions asked. Remember to head to ZBiotics.com/LockedOnCollege and use the code LockedOnCollege, all caps and no spaces, at checkout for 15% off. Give ZBiotics a shot today. This episode of Locked On Utes is also brought to you by our friends at Game Time. Game Picks is here, and they filter out all the fluff to show you only incredible deals and all the great seats so you don't have to waste your time searching through thousands of tickets. And it's not just tickets for sporting events. They also have you covered for concert, comedy, and theater events near you. But look, you're obviously a massive sports fan, as am I. So that's where Game Time has you covered, because they have things like the Tog Line, this feature that shows you the total up front with no surprise fees at checkout. How about the panoramic seat view? I get so frustrated when I buy a ticket and I don't know what my view is even going to look like from the seat I purchased. That's not an issue with Game Time. It's also that low price guarantee where Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. And your purchase is covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege. That's capital L for locked, O for on, and C in college. And the rest are all lowercase. So Locked On College for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create that account and redeem code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. And Michelle, it was finally game time for the Utah men's and women's basketball programs. You were up at the Huntsman. It was a wild day between Kyle Whittingham's press conference and the player media availability later on. But what were your impressions of, we'll go with the women's team first because they were in action first, and then the men's team. What was your first impressions of the 2024-2025 Utah men's and women's basketball programs?
Women's team, of course, is it's so good to have Gianna Neefkins back, right? She just adds such a flavor to what they do. And I think it was very clear, how much she was missed last season. And I know that it was kind of easy to go along and kind of forget that and poo-poo that a little bit. But I mean, she left a big gaping hole for them last season, and I think having her back in the mix is going to make a huge difference for them. I think it opens up things for others like Kennedy McQueen and Jenna Johnson to kind of do what they do. And then Maya Torre, made her debut, and much more of like your typical,
Rhode Island transfer.
taller center, more so than Alyssa Peely. Again, it just kind of opens things up a little bit for him. It's a very different look than what we've been used to perhaps the last 2 seasons, but I think it has potential to be really exciting. It was just very high energy, very fun, entertaining brand of basketball to watch. If no one's been up to see them before, highly encourage you to. I think that season will be fun. Looking at the men's side of things, again, it's a case of actually this team looks drastically different than the women's team does. Like there's some new faces for the women's team for sure, but this team is basically entirely brand new. But you have a guy like Gabe Madsen putting on a show and really, I think, showing some growth in his game. I'm excited to see what he kind of continues to do. Ezra showed some promise. I'm trying to think who else.
Ford from East Carolina.
I think he has the potential to do some really interesting things. I thought the men's team looked overall a lot more athletic than I think we've been used to seeing them. I think they took another step up in that regard. So it's just going to be interesting to see how they kind of continue to meld together. Again, this is almost entirely new faces, not a lot of returning guys. How does it all come together? How do they gel and play as a team? For the most part, I thought they looked pretty good. All things considered. Obviously still I think some work to do, some things to kind of clean up there, more for them than probably the women's team. But and then you have to just take into account too, the Big 12 is a good basketball conference. So, what is this new look running Utes team going to be able to do early on in the Big 12? I think it'll be fun and interesting to watch. We'll see. We've made jokes about, football was projected to be top of the conference and they're not. So wouldn't the kicker be that the men's basketball team was voted to basically be the bottom of the conference and they end up being more towards the top? It just feels like how this season might go. But we'll just kind of see. But I think both teams have a fun product, and I hope fans will kind of get out and support them, and we'll see where they take themselves.
Yeah, so many new faces for the men's team, like you said. I mean, we also got our first look at Gabe's brother was in action, had 15 points, right? There's guys like you mentioned, Asur Dawes comes over the transfer there too. There's so many new players for this men's team. Miro Little, one of them too. They're going to find the chemistry, and they made 19 threes, to credit to them.
Yeah.
And yes, the women's team lost. Crazy. And then the women's team did lose Alyssa Peely, but that group of Gianna Neepkins, Jenna Johnson, Kennedy McQueen, and then Vieira, they've played a ton of basketball together, and that chemistry is going to play big dividends. You already mentioned the difference that the center position is going to make for Utah this year too. You don't have a player of Peely's caliber, maybe you still have really good options there too. I think it's Shira Evans from Michigan is also coming over too. So that's another one.
Season,
oh, that's right. She is out for the season. Oh my gosh. I forgot about that. She did get injured. Ugh. Well, now that ends the episode on a downer. Hey, Michelle, to bring us back up, why don't you tell everyone where they can read more about Utah athletics though?
Yeah. So you can check out all my work at UteZone.com. Or you can follow along on social media at Bodkin is a boss. We'll get you to me on X, Threads, and Instagram.
Thanks for stopping by, Michelle.
No problem.
That's going to do it for today's edition of Locked On Utes. Jake Hatch stops by tomorrow for our annual crossover, Locked On Utes and Locked On Cougars. That one will be a lot of fun, breaking down this matchup as we roll on towards the conclusion of rivalry week. We hope you'll join us tomorrow.